My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And today we're exploring the languid menace of Scenic Dunnsmouth.
Our first segment is the basic crawl. So Scenic Dunnsmouth is a Lamentations of the Flame Princess module written by Zarkov Kowalski, and I hope I didn't get his first name wrong. The art is by Jez Gordon. According to the book, it is a location-based module designed with replay value in mind, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that assertion later in the program. So the idea behind Scenic Dunnsmouth is, and I should warn you listeners, this is a spoilers podcast, so just know that going into it, okay? We are talking about everything. The idea behind Scenic Dunnsmouth is it is a backwater swamp community, basically, where there's lots of like deep supernatural creepiness going on, some ancient mysteries, and the party members are there for different reasons. The book gives you kind of a setup of possible options for why the players might be there. The really cool thing about Scenic Dunnsmouth is you roll a bunch of dice on a piece of paper, and depending on several different factors, including the size of the dice, the number that comes up on the dice positions relative to one another, you generate a unique version of Dunnsmouth for your game. There are also these four families in Dunnsmouth: the Duncasters, the Dunlops, the Samsons, and the Van Kauses, each of which is represented by a suit in a deck of playing cards. And one of the steps that you do is you draw from that deck to populate your village with different members of these families. So you end up with essentially a completely unique version of Dunnsmouth, right? But there are a few things that are kind of consistent throughout the story, and they're kind of the major story elements around which the whole module revolves. But then, even then, the basic nature of those elements can vary, right, depending on the die drop. But those sort of like large major story elements are, there's this time cube artifact that is affecting how time is perceived and how time progresses in the village. There is a spider cult, which it's not really a cult driven by a particular ideology as much as it's a genetic thing. There is a spider that is basically has passed on a genetic sort of affection among the people for it, and that has also caused certain members of the community to have spider-like traits. And so it's a sort of cult that is driven more by like biological urge, right? There are a couple of classic sort of hero's journey-esque characters like Uncle Ivanovic and Magda. Uncle Ivanovic is your classic sort of harbinger character, right? Magda is the Roma-esque fortune teller witch character. We have the church and Father Ioannopoulos. We have the ancient shame of the Van Kaus family and the mystery surrounding that. So those are some things that are always kind of present, or usually will be present, depending on how your setup goes. But otherwise, there are many, many other details that change every time you create the community of Dunnsmouth. So, with all that setup in mind, and I've done a lot of talking here, I apologize, Tom.
Sorry.
What did you like about the module, having read through it?
Well, the first thing I have on my list is I really need to mention the artwork by Jez Gordon, which is a very striking red and black colour palette. And the reason I like it is because the setting is all swampy and fog enshrouded. And it would have been easy for the book to become splodgy in different shades of grey and
grey,
have this kind
green,
of,
and purple,
this sort of
right,
mushy aesthetic to it. But that hasn't happened. It's got this really good use of high contrast colours in the artwork that make each piece memorable, and that's good for locking the identity of the NPCs into your memory when you're running the game, or for just finding your way around the pages of the book, as well as conveying the atmosphere of the scenario.
Yeah, and the red and black echoes one of the major sorts of things you do in the setup, which is you draw from the deck of cards, right? And with each of the suits representing one of the families, right? So there's like a nice like connection there between like what you're actually doing, the look of the book. I also like that red and black design. It's so striking, and I mean, it really makes the text pop. It makes the illustrations pop. It just looks so great. In our own little RPG zine codex, and I shouldn't say little. Paul hates it when I say little zine codex. He thinks that's unnecessarily deprecating, self-deprecating. Our fabulous, wonderful zine codex, we do that, right? We pick a single color every month that we use to like kind of to pull through the whole issue to create like a really nice, cohesive look. And so, yeah, I agree. It's a super sharp looking book. Lamentations product, right? That's par for the course. You expect that, right? Well, so what else did you love about the book apart from just the visuals?
I also like the spider cult. I like that it's not even necessarily there, which is great. But mainly what I like is its lack of motivation. It doesn't really have an evil plan. It's just minding its own business, propagating itself. Although there is a caveat to that. Some of the NPC entries have, if this person is infected, then it has changes to the write-up based on that. And in some cases, like that guy who has a secret quote-unquote family in the mountains, if he's infected, that behavior gets a bit dark. But generally speaking, it's a cult that if your heroes show up and start battling it, there's questions to be asked about why they're doing it.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're the asshole, right?
Yeah, that's it.
The heroes are the assholes in this. They're the villains. Like, these people are minding their own fucking business, and your people are coming in for whatever the pretense is. We're there to collect taxes. That's when I ran it. That was actually one of the pretexts I had. You're there to collect taxes. You're there to investigate X. You're just passing through. These people are fucking minding their own business, and you're going in there and you're just fucking with their shit. Like, so yeah, I love that too. I thought that was really great. I think it's an interesting sort of thematic, I don't know if juxtaposition is the right word, but it's an interesting twist, right, on this. You think spider cult, okay, right, bad guys, right? And there can be some real dark situations.
And they're
set up, like you said.
Yeah. There are definitely bad guys in that NPC mix, but they're not bad guys because they're in the spider cult. They're just awful people. Anyway.
People, yeah. Yeah, I like that too. I thought that was I picked up on that as well. I thought that was super, super great. Anything else as far as like big picture things you really love about the module?
Well, it's just related to the generation thing, which looks like a kind of fun game to play though. Unlike you, I haven't run this, I've only owned and admired it. But I like the idea that the GM gets to discover the village in a similar way to the players do. When you're going through your dice rolls, you're not picking from a list, you're not making it yourself. You're cross-referencing your die results and the locations of the dice against what you see in the book as you go through the pages. And you, as you write down your notes, are finding out what's really going on in the village. So you get to have a bit of discovery-based fun before the scenario begins.
Yeah, having done it, and that's actually a nice segue into what I wanted to talk about, what I like about the module. Having done it, it's extremely fun. That's probably my favorite part of Scenic Dunnsmouth is, as the GM, preparing the village or the community. It's really more of a community. Like the houses and stuff don't have to be right next to each other, right? But they're kind of all within walking distance. But preparing the community is incredibly fun. Like, it's just damn fun. I mean, the process of dropping the dice and noting the positions, it feels very novel. It's very interactive. You still have some decisions to make. Like, it's not all completely prescribed, right? There are some things you get to choose, and it's fun to watch it all come together. And as it's all coming together, at least for me, I was thinking about the connections, right? Because you end up with these NPCs that, because of the way the scenario is generated, don't have any direct connections to one another, right? They have to be kind of like independent of one another because you may not end up with the same groups, right? But the fun of it is, as you're creating it, you're making those connections in your mind, right? You're thinking, oh, well, if, X, X person's, this Samson over here, like, generally hates this group of people over here. So it makes sense for maybe they have a little rivalry going on. You start to make those little connections. That is probably my favorite part of Scenic Dunnsmouth, just from the GM standpoint, incredibly fun to put together. The other thing that I love about this book is it is a genre that is my favorite thing to do in fantasy games. I love the creepy mystery village. Okay. I just ran one in Dungeon World. In fact, it was a village called Frostdale. Not the same themes, but the same kind of exploration, right? Like you were just kind of caught up in these people's drama and their weird ancient mysteries and grudges and rivalries. Super fun. Even after you've run Scenic Dunnsmouth, the book remains an incredible resource for building villages of this type. Like it's a very inspirational text in that way.
Well, so that leads into our next thing to cover, which is questions that we might have about Scenic Dunnsmouth. And for me, I wanted to ask you about your experience with generating the village. Do you think it's something that you can use again, but not necessarily in Dunnsmouth? Can you take those elements and kind of draw more cards and make it into the next village down, or what?
My instinct is no. I know that Zarkov says that in the beginning. It's like the first paragraph in the text, right, where he says, like, that I read earlier in the intro, like this idea of replay value for the same group. I don't buy it. And the reason why I don't buy it is because there's certain elements, like the time cube, for example, that just seem so fixed. Like, I don't know how you can have that be in the next village and it not feel really familiar, right? Even the idea of the spider cult, I feel like if you had the same group of heroes and you play Dunnsmouth and then like maybe even like 5-10 sessions later, you run it again, but like renaming the village, but otherwise generating in the same way, I just feel like you would pick up on the themes really quickly. You would immediately pick up on the spider cult strangeness. And I think it would lose something, you know?
Oh, that's true. Although one of the claims is that it doesn't matter if the players have read the book, it's unspoilable. I think the spider cult might be unspoilable in that way. Like the time cube is just the time cube. It's there. It's dilating time, whatever. It is what it is.
Right, yeah.
That's a kind of a strange thing to say it is what it is about, but there you go. Whereas the spider cult, like if this module were called The Spider Cult of Dunnsmouth, and that was what you were coming to play for the first time, pretty much all this stuff is things that you would not be totally surprised about when it happened. So like you'd see one character, you think, oh, he might be the bad guy, or he might be an innocent caught up in it. He might have a secret spider child hidden in the attic. Probably around 20% of them do, I guess, in an average Dunnsmouth. And then, in that sense, I think you could play it one time or have read it and then play it, and you'd still have all your activities would be pretty much the same because you know going in there's probably a spider cult, but that won't necessarily diminish your enjoyment. And that's a separate issue, I think, from trying to reuse the material with the same characters later on.
Yeah, I guess I'm mostly there with you on that. I think here's my thing. I'm not sure it has to be replayable. Like, who gives a shit? That's my feeling on it, right? There are a million dungeons you can run. You know, like there's so many dungeons you can run your group through, and why not just do Dunnsmouth once for your group? If you really need like some kind of replayability, I mean, gosh, go run it for another group. Go run it at a con. Do a one shot at a con or something. I'm not sure. Like, I feel like you can get so much enjoyment out of running it, like preparing it and running it once for your group. It just seems like I feel like maybe like they were communicating to some sort of imagined purchaser who demands replay value in everything they buy, right? And I'm not personally that person.
People who complain about risk legacy, that kind of thing, yeah.
Right, yeah, right, yeah. It's like this absurd argument, right? Like, did you enjoy the hell out of this? Yes. Like, did you find some inspiration from it? Can you use bits and bobs here and there? Did you like that? Bits and bobs, the little Britishism.
That's good. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't. It doesn't even seem like I have kind of like a shrug to this.
A shrug. All right. Well, here's a different but related follow-up question. Has this inspired you to kind of try and make your own, maybe slightly easier to write up, random generating village mechanism, or is it just going to be too much work?
I don't think I'd want to. This is a pretty intricate thing that he's done here. I do think I'd love to see more like it, though. I think that'd be really cool. I would love to see more products like this. And I know in the OSR there are things like this out there. Like I know Vornheim has kind of like a die drop sort of city generation thing that's pretty famous. It's not quite the same thing, right? But I'd love to see it. For me, I'm content to rely on the efforts of others here, I think.
Okay. All right. Okay. So one more question, then I'll let you talk more. But I'm also curious, when you ran it, did you stick to having the map that you generated, whether shown to the players or not? As you know, there's locations over here, the churches, like on this eastern promontory or what have you. Or did you adapt it to your more abstract things like fronts and dungeon moves and, Jason Cordova stuff?
I ran it in World of Dungeons. Yeah, I ran it in World of Dungeons, so there's definitely like an opportunity there to kind of abstract it out, right? I did not, though. I used the map. I run online, so I made a scan of the map and I posted that up on our little board. And it was not a great map. I am famously awful at drawing maps, but my players get a chuckle out of it because it's so awful. But everything, the relative positions of everything. Yeah, I kept all that. Like the place where you draw the road, the relative positions of all the locations. Yeah, I made that all. Like I used the map absolutely.
Okay, cool. Well, that concludes my bout of questioning for you. Do you want to do Chain Lightning?
Let's do Chain Lightning. Yeah, the Chain Lightning round. Really quick, just little small details about the book that we loved. Why don't you start, Tom?
Okay, sure. My number one is the thing. This is a time cube thing where a spell gets imprinted on a character's eyes, and then it's like a spell scroll. So if you read it out loud, the spell gets cast, but your eyes just dissolve into dust.
Nice. My first one is hidden family members in the basement, right? Because of their spider-like features. That shit is so Southern Gothic. I love that. This idea of like shamed or shameful family members that we keep hidden from view, and they're hidden from view because they have like spider mandibles or they have multiple eyes and that kind of thing. Super creepy. Great detail.
Okay, my number two is the extra instructions. There's like maybe 3 or 4 instances, I guess, of what happens if you draw any cards when making the village that you were supposed to have taken out of the deck. So the jokers or an advert for something. And I just like it because it's kind of a joke, but it's also kind of practical and would sort of tempt you to deliberately do the thing wrong, which I think is also kind of cool.
Yeah, and that flows right into my second one, which is one of those specific outcomes if you fail to remove the card you're supposed to remove from the deck, which is you can get an element for your village called Jarl the Dog. And Jarl the Dog is creepy as fuck. It's a dog that sits at the end of the dock. He has a little Viking helmet on. He's super friendly, but he otherwise just stares out at an unknown object in the distance. You thought that was
creepy? I found him quite charming. But,
I thought charming and creepy. Well, I could consider creepy charming, so I'm there with you. Your characters then begin to have dreams of Jarl the Dog. Jarl affects your hit points.
Maybe that is a little bit creepy, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just this idea of this dog, this friendly dog that otherwise just stares out into space is really great.
Yeah. Oh, and it's my number 3 is just the example at the end of the book, which is the example of building Dunnsmouth, but illustrated, showing you where the dice were rolled, and then step by step, and just really clearly illustrating it, because I'd been going through the book and thinking, well, this is all good, but I'm still a little confused about how to do it, and then this is just so clear. It really shows that Zarkov has thought about what people need to know and how to set up to run the game, and yeah, it's just really good.
And my final one goes back to my first one, which is there's a table that lets you roll up spider mutations. If you have a villager who needs some spider mutations, or a baby gets born requiring some spider mutations, you can roll on this table to find out how many extra arms they have, whether they have multiple eyes, and that kind of thing. Just a fun little, very fun, like kind of classic little OSR-ish kind of table. So I'm super into it. Let's go to our next segment. Our next segment is the Expert Delve. Tom, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the possibility of using Scenic Dunnsmouth in a modern era or recent past setting. The reason that I bring this up is because one of the things the Time Cube does, maybe the only thing? No, it does a few things. The main thing that you see around the village, however, that the Time Cube does is that it slows down time in its surrounding area. And as written, there's a sort of thing about it, it's about 20 years behind the modern times that your characters come from. But really, because it's set in, is it 1600s for Lamentations-ish?
Lamentations is, kind of like a fantastical sort of Dutch masters era Europe.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, yeah. It's just great hats throughout. But that's the thing, you can't really tell from, fashion cues or a lack of awareness of recent cultural phenomena as a player that they're behind the times. All you really have to go on is that some characters have aged faster than others because they tend to leave the village and come back, and so they've been going out of the range of the time cube. And I think that if you were to set this in the modern era, it would be much easier to do. You don't have to just say, oh, by the way, this place is like really old-fashioned. You can give subtle clues, like, everyone's got old mobile phones and there's no data connection or something. Or you can make it a bit more obvious than that. You could just say, everything in this town looks like it's from 1976.
Yeah, I agree. Having run it, I will tell you that the time dilation that is supposed to happen because of the existence of the time cube buried somewhere in the village, kind of all you really have to lean on to get that across is the fact that it never seems like nighttime or daytime. It's just kind of like a weird sort of overcast gray. And like you mentioned, the sort of subtle, like, aging things. And also the fact that the villagers can't quite talk about time in appropriate ways. Like, they don't have a good sense of time, right? But it's not super easy. I'll tell you, it's not. Like, outside of just saying, hey, time is weird here, it's really, really difficult to convey that in play to the players. I found it to be very hard. We managed it, and it was all fine. And there was something, and to be fair, to play devil's advocate here, there's something to be said for the players gradually, slowly piecing that truth together, but it's not easy. It's a bit vague in presentation. It can be. So I agree with you. This Scenic Dunnsmouth, to my mind, wants to be played in a modern context, right? Like, it really does. The Southern Gothic themes especially help hammer that home. And like you said, there are more things that we can kind of grab onto in terms of like our own culture and having more space to play with in terms of like showing how this place is unstuck in time. Absolutely. So what are we thinking in terms of maybe games or adaptations that we could do here?
Well, my first thought for an adaptation was one in tone, which is kind of going from slightly farcical comedy to presumably horror later on, which would be somewhere between Jeeves and Wooster and the film Withnail and I. I don't know if that was big in America or whatever, but
it was not.
Okay. Suffice to say that it's about two out-of-work actors who go on a trip to the countryside because they're meant to go on holiday or something, and things go terribly wrong. And the line that sums it up is, "You've got to help us. We've gone on holiday by mistake." And I think that would be quite good. Like, you just you've rented your uncle's rural cottage for the season or something, and it turns out it's in Dunnsmouth. And then you're just there. You don't really have any reason to be there, but you can't get out either.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. That makes a lot of sense to me, especially if you were going to go with it more like, if you wanted to play up the more like humorous aspects of the module. And it can be quite funny. It's creepy. It's Southern Gothic. It swelters, but it's also kind of funny. Like the Duncasters, for example, the way they read, like, they are just total like backwater people, right? Like it plays up some of those tropes. I'm thinking Scenic Dunnsmouth would be a great setup for Cthulhu Dark, personally. I think you could do Cthulhu Dark very, very easily using this setup. You could do the whole same setup and just have like the sort of final cosmic horror or whatever, just have that be maybe a more like malicious sentient version of the time cube, possibly the original spider, which is kind of controlling the people who are part of the spider cult and who the spider cult members kind of worship and are really protective of, or possibly even the ancient entity that the Van Kaus family and their sort of secret shame like is tied to. You could kind of go in any of those directions with it, but I could absolutely 100% see a modern day or modern-ish day Cthulhu Dark thing. I think that would work really great.
And you could use some of the results you haven't had for the kind of visions that you get on a 6 when you investigate things. Like, you could make that a kind of weird dream sequence of the, if a household isn't infected, you show them a picture of what it would be like if it were, that kind of thing. That would be pretty cool. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, using a more like a lighter, more narrative system, you can absolutely like break it open like that, right? I mean, I ran it in World of Dungeons, and in World of Dungeons demands that you sometimes have to kind of have results and fill in bits of fiction that maybe the module didn't anticipate, right? And but fortunately it did, and it does help because, like you said, you can draw on these other elements to kind of help flesh those things out. So even the stuff that you don't use in the module, when you're doing the setup, becomes very on the table, right? In that way. What other games do you think? What other kind of permutations could we do?
Okay, well, I have one that's slightly more difficult to pull off, perhaps, because I don't know how practical it would be to have player characters who are already members of the community, although presumably not in the spider cult, but hey, who knows. So when I thought about a small town where nothing seems to happen, and it feels like time is passing more slowly than in the rest of the world. I thought about the poor Sega game Nicotine Girls, which...
That's a good one.
Would that work?
I could kind of see where you're going with this, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
I'm into it. I think you would really have to lean into the more of the human drama part of it than the weird supernatural part of it. Or you could do both, but I think you'd have to put the human drama aspect of it a little more forward and kind of have the other stuff be a little bit more in the background, I feel like, but I could see it happening. Characters that already exist in the village would be tricky, but I think I could pull it off. I think it would just require you to view the different members of the community that you've generated in a slightly different frame, right? And I think that's okay. It's a super interesting idea for sure. Okay, well, I think that's a pretty good discussion of ways that we could kind of adapt Scenic Dunnsmouth to other contexts. Let's go to the next segment. Our next segment is the companion adventures. So, Tom, if we're going to look at other types of media to get inspired or to capture the essential essence of Dunnsmouth, what do you have in mind?
Okay, so my first thing is I'm not sure I actually recommend this book because the prose is kind of amazing, but I think it is a little bit juvenile in a way, but it is as dark as anything, and it's very Southern Gothic, and that is Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy, who you may know from such novels as the Border Trilogy or The Road. And Outer Dark is one of his early ones, and it starts with a child being abandoned in the woods because it's the product of incest, and it kind of gets worse from there. And you will find all the sullen villages and brutal violence and just general horribleness that you might care to in that book. I don't know that I would say that it's a great read, but if you happen to come across a copy at a reasonable price and you feel up to it, I think it captures the Dunnsmouth mood pretty well, and you would only have to read even just a couple chapters and you'd already be there.
Cool. I would recommend the first season of True Detective. I know this is one that you and I both thought of when we were doing our notes. The first season of True Detective is money for this. I mean, it is Scenic Dunnsmouth house down boots. I mean, it is so it's a backwater swamp. There's a family with a secret. There is Lovecraftian shit going on. It's got it all. Especially if you were going to do Scenic Dunnsmouth in that context we talked about earlier, like a more modern context. Boy, this is perfect. But even just running it straight, the mood, the attitude, the voices of the characters, like if you want to do some voice work, all that stuff. The idea of the protagonists being outsiders, going into the community, all that stuff comes through really well in the first season of True Detective. I think it is if you really want to like really land the feeling of Scenic Dunnsmouth, at least the way I perceive Scenic Dunnsmouth, that is, go for that. What else?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Just the scenery for me, because of course I've never been in that kind of countryside in real life, but I think that kind of those slowly flooding communities, I think that's, in my mind's eye, that's exactly what Dunnsmouth looks like.
Yeah. I mean, when I read the text, it seems like a Louisiana backswamp. I mean, it was like the first thing I thought of for sure. Anything else, Tom?
Yeah, I've got a bit of music for you, although not a specific piece or album. But I think that to get into the headspace of this, you want something that's kind of a bit slow and unusual sounding, perhaps. And for that reason, I recommend Javanese gamelan music, which this is based on a warning from my wife once that I should beware of falling asleep if we went to church and they were using the gamelan, because it's very languid. That's the word we used early on, right? And it has this effect of lulling you into a sense of serene calm. So I recommend, looking up gamelan stuff. Just on YouTube, you'll find they've done some recordings from like the 1970s where they were going around different royal kraton palaces and just capturing for posterity what their gamelan ensemble sounded like. And there are two kinds you could be YouTube searching, just Javanese and also gamelan degung, which is Degung, and that is a bit more active and has a kind of prominent flute part, so that's good for your action scenes and investigation, maybe, if you are the kind of person that does background music while you're gaming.
Awesome. I just thought of one more, too. Little bonus. A Rose for Emily by Faulkner. Short story, Southern Gothic short story about an isolated woman and the literal secrets, like in her attic, or as I recall, something like that. She's got a bunch of skeletons in her closet, let's just say. Again, I think also similar to some of Cormac McCarthy's stuff, like you've said, really, really captures the feel and spirit of what I believe Scenic Dunnsmouth is going for. And listeners, that's our show. Fear of a Black Dragon is produced by The Gauntlet. If you want to get in touch with us, we have a G Plus community. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for The Gauntlet. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. You can follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. And if you like what we do, we would always love your support on Patreon. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. Tom, thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Listeners, thanks so much for listening. Oh, hey, before we go, Tom.
Yeah.
I have to say, I know we're only one episode in, but I'm not super happy with the name of the podcast. Do you have any ideas for what else we might call it?
What about Straight Outta Hamlet?
Oh, Tom.